last thing I'll talk about is I'm a Howard Stern fan. All right, and I know that these days that's a controversial thing to say, although that's always been a controversial thing to say for different reasons. But um, just recently they announced that Howard Stern was the show was gonna be canceled. That was but the real story there is, I guess the rates aren't as high as they used to, um, and um, and so they're not going to offer him what he's been making. So default, he'll probably bow out. Plus his age, he's in his 70s. Um, I think there's a lot of truth to why if he does leave. Yeah, but I do think this day and age, it's like it's the cool thing to hate Howard Stern. It really is. And I think he kind of dug his own grave for a lot of this stuff. Um, when you start getting political, and Howard Stern's never really been political. It's more been about entertainment. But I think he couldn't help himself, and he got political, with the Trump bashing and whatnot. And I do think that that did cost him. But I've still been an avid listener. I've been listening to Howard Stern since the mid '90s. I started listening on the radio, and yes, he was definitely wilder back then, and the crazy hijinks. But even back then, I don't think the things that people cherry pick about the Howard Stern show are like the wildest of the wild. But for me, the thing that always brought me back to Howard Stern is because he knows how to put a good show together. But it's not really Howard that that is like the thing that's the funniest to me about the show. He orchestrates it all and he knows what he's doing, but his staff has always been the draw for me. And to me, I think that stuff's still there today. I think um what's up? It's a weird issue because people that are on one side of the political spectrum, boy, they love to hate on Howard Stern. And there's been an audience that hates Howard Stern anyway. But most people that are armchair quarterback and Howard Stern, they don't listen to Howard Stern. That's just the truth. Okay. I do listen to Howard Stern. I've been listening to him almost religiously since the mid 90s. I've been listening to him throughout, I guess, the Trump era. And yes, they're not wrong. Yeah, he did. I think that did cost him. But as far as whether I can't listen to the show anymore, no, I still listen to it religiously because it's still entertaining, because his staff is still hilarious, which Howard orchestrates all that stuff, by the way. But Ronnie the limo driver has never been I guess unlistenable to me. Quite the opposite. Still to this day, Ronnie the limo driver is radio gold, and I'll put him over just about any podcast that's on the internet. Um, and you still have the Whack Pack on there. Juice hasn't really been on the Howard Stern show. There's a few Whack Packers that some of them have passed away, some of them have just moved on to other things, but there's still always some sort of draw about his staff that I always laugh at and find interesting, like JD Harmeyer. Um, to be honest, Howard himself, when he talks about his parents, that's when I kind of want to check out, because I think everybody cherry picks the things about the show that they like and they don't like. And he's had people call in and say, hey, could you stop talking about this? And then the very next call will be somebody saying, could you play more Benji? I think that's what's cool about his show, is a lot of what draws people in is the polarizing type things that people love and people hate at the same time. When I listen to the show today, I don't think it's strong as it has been, like, say, when Artie was on and stuff like that. But I do think people love they want the show to fail so bad. But the people that want the show to fail, they don't watch the show. They don't listen to the show. So that's kind of my take on the whole Howard Stern thing. If you listen to his show, he is going to make a statement on September 2nd. And I'm going to call it right now. I don't think the show's going to be canceled. I don't. I do think, because if Howard Stern is anything, he is very loyal to his employees. He's always taking care of his employees. Most of the time when people leave the Howard Stern show, more times than not, they're not fired. They leave on their own accord. And Howard goes out of his way to keep people employed. He just does. And there's people like Benji that should have been fired a million times ago, but he still keeps them on because he knows people will call in. Another person that I failed to mention was Bobo. Bobo is comedy gold because of how bad of a caller he is. But then Howard makes content out of that, of the parody songs about Bobo. But if you don't, like, probably most of you don't even listen to Howard Stern, so you don't even know what I'm really talking about. But for those of you that do listen to Howard Stern, you know what I'm talking about. It's not as bad as people make it out to be. And I think people, they try to cherry pick things to make him look bad. And one example is they had this, like, it was kind of like a just a regular staff meeting that Howard had with his employees, and it's a PowerPoint presentation that wasn't supposed to be public, and people were just like, constantly ripping that video apart, saying that oh, Howard, he's so lame. But I'm sorry, I've been in a bunch of a million different, like, staff meetings. In the military, you go through staff meetings all the time. They're boring as fuck. It's completely different atmosphere than the actual show that he does. So it's easy to poke at that stuff, but I'm sorry, a good boss is going to have meetings with his employees. Does that make him lame? People think that, I don't know what they think, but it seems like the only way for Howard to win is if he doesn't control his employees, and he just, sits back and, strippers just randomly walk in into his studio. It doesn't work like that. Everything is still highly orchestrated. And Howard Stern today is different than Howard Stern before. I think that's intentional because the world today is different than it was back in the 90s. It's just a very different atmosphere. I don't think Howard Stern would get away with what he got away with in the 90s. It's just a different world. People are more offended by things than they were back then. And I think Howard just adjusted. Is the show as good as it was back then? No, but I think it's still highly entertaining. And I think, you have stuff like prostate karaoke. Just think about that. And that's something that was pretty recent on the show. Like when Sal and Richard are on the show, it's freaking amazing. It's always amazing. Still to this day, it's amazing. And these are things that they don't want to tell you. They think that Howard's just the talking head and nobody else is around. And so everything's on his shoulders. But to be fair about it, and I guess from the perspective of a Howard fan and somebody that's been listening to him for over 30 years now, it's because he is anti-Trump. And by the way, Howard has actually throttled his political talk. He even said it. He says, I'm not talking about it anymore. Okay. I got myself in trouble for talking about it. I've gotten myself in trouble for talking before, and it's doing the show no favors. So he alienate half of his audience. Yeah, he probably did. But I still think it's not as bad as they make it out to be. And I still think he's going to continue. I really do. If only to keep his employees gainfully employed. But I do still think that there's some highly entertaining content on Howard's show. And I would still actually put him above a lot. Like, if you turn on a random podcast these days, there's a good chance it's not going to be as produced and as entertaining as Howard is. Even the way Howard talks to some of his, his phone callers. He comes across as really rude to them, but he does it in the sake of entertainment. He wants to shock you. So I know my opinion is not going to really matter that much, but I'm just trying to be fair about the whole thing. Like I said, my favorite era of Howard is when he had Artie on and all that stuff. But I still, if I get to a point where I can't deal with a show anymore and I get bored, I move on. I've done that with YouTube channels before. There's YouTube channels that I've watched in the past, and then I just got sick of them and I moved on. I've never done that with Howard. I've rolled my eyes quite a few times with him, and I've said, I've talked at my radio and said, hey, maybe you shouldn't be talking so much politics stuff, because half your audience, they're not going to care. They're not going to listen to what you're saying. You're going to piss them off. So yeah, that's my opinion on the whole Howard.